welcome to Semantic Reactions, the official podcast of the Institute of General Semantics. My name is Ben Hauk, and I'm pleased to be able to introduce the 41st installment in our ongoing series. Our first episode of 2026 features a conversation hosted by IGS trustees Corey Anton, Susan Drucker, Thom Gencarelli, and Lance Strate on politics in the United States in light of recent events in Minneapolis. Their discussion deals with the concerns brought on by the current media and semantic environment, the use of cell phone cameras and video recordings, the introduction of deepfakes, information overload and image culture, and the importance of language. Let's hear what they have to say.
Welcome to another episode of Semantic Reactions, the official podcast of the Institute of General Semantics. My name is Lance Strate, and I am here with my fellow trustees, Susan Drucker, Corey Anton, and Thom Gencarelli, to talk things over, as we do every so often on this podcast. And it seems like there's quite a lot to talk over in regard to recent events. So, folks, I think for a lot of us, our heads are spinning. Sue, as the lawyer in our midst, would you care to comment on what we've been witnessing lately?
Well, I'd start off by saying I think that what we've been witnessing represents kind of an ultra-hazardous activities with regard to a democracy and constitutional order. I'm worried. I think these are serious times, and I'm particularly worried about flagrant violations of the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, the Ninth Amendment, the 14th Amendment, and now we're adding the Second Amendment.
I was wondering, I was going to point out you left that one out.
That's a big one. I think it's probably one of the most interesting developments in recent days. I could probably go on, but with more amendments, I can certainly go back to the body of the Constitution itself, like the balance of powers and congressional powers in Article 1. So I think that we are in perilous times for all sorts of reasons. And as someone who cares very much for our Constitution and our constitutional rights, I think that's kind of uppermost in my mind and my heart these days.
Well, I think we all share that sentiment. Thom, what are your thoughts?
I always sort of hate to introduce things in a way that, dates myself and ages myself. But as someone who has been of age to be politically involved for quite some time now, and who's always sort of, hyper-reflexive about trying to understand things not from, the place and time where we're at or where I'm at, but to try to, get the larger context and see the patterns. I guess what has been like a snowball rolling down the hill. By the way, there's 21 inches of snow on my property right now. As a snowball rolling down the hill for some time. What has been going on in recent years? From general semantics point of view, we talk about dating, and I look at things that have been happening, and I say, "Oh, this is crazy. This is a deal breaker. It can't get worse." And then it's not that it necessarily gets worse, but that it continues. And you wait and you say, when will cooler heads, more sensible heads, more sane heads prevail? And they don't. And you sort of wonder how long this could possibly go on. So over this past couple of weeks, I'm looking at what's transpired. I'm thinking about what's transpired, and I'm saying to myself, this has to be the breaking point. This has to be the turning point. And then I look at myself as I'm looking myself in the Zoom window right now, and I laugh. Oh, you've got to be kidding. Because it just goes on. And with respect to the dating of our political economic situation, I'm not seeing the differences. I'm seeing just this flat continuation of craziness and things that are hurtful to our experiment in democracy.
Well, now, Corey, you live, the rest of us live in the New York City area.
Yeah.
Which is, of course, a liberal bastion. The city now has a socialist mayor, after all. But you are the odd duck here in living in Michigan, where I think people have guns, generally, and that there is a lot more of kind of conservative and Republican presence over there.
Sure.
How do things look from that vantage point?
Well, there's so much to say here. I think that, with my wife being kind of a DC kid, growing up with lots of relatives and people in the military or who are in the government and worked in various places aligned with DC, I know in speaking with them in various conversations that there are people who are scared of the anti-gov people in Michigan. I mean, there is a fair body of Michigan militia. I mean, we really are. We're a state that's armed to the teeth. Most of the people who I know, they don't just have a gun or two. They have an arsenal. I mean, they have guns. They'll have a dozen guns, and they have various kinds of of other preparations, as it were. So I mean, I think there is that sense of people here being, I think, less understanding or tolerant of encroachment against people's right to bear arms. So there's that, just as a side. I think going back to the thing that Thom was saying about the relentlessness of it all, that would be my own sense. And I think that would be the way I'd want to qualify anything I have to say here, which is that since the presidency, I've been since the most recent presidency of Trump, I've really just paid less and less attention to the media. And I've noticed that in my own experience, just over the last, we'll say 10 years, as more and more people unplug from mainstream media and get their information or their media from different sort of social media outlets, I don't think there's a coherent sense of what people are experiencing, of what's really going on. That is like what's going on. If we ask the question, what's going on in the general semantic sense, I don't know if there's a shared environment or a like in some way there's a flashpoint of some event that maybe people tune into, but they're tuning into it through different lensed and biased forms, and it's not like the old three major legacy media and you got one of three feeds in the evening news and there was an ability to get around the water cooler the next day and sort of talk about what we all witnessed. Instead, it's this kind of inpouring, but we're trying to feed from the fire hose, and it's 80 million different directions, and depends on how you're approaching the hose and everything else. So some of it, I think, it's really hard to get a beat on what's going on, and I personally found it exhausting, emotionally, just draining, and I'm trying to really unplug from it, as much as I don't want to be apathetic or an apolitical ostrich. Part of me, it's for my own mental health and or well-being to sit and to try to keep up on it all. It's just exhausting, and it really is indefatigable how every day you think, well, this has to be like this, where is the courage of people to go, enough is enough?
Just you mentioned the previous shared environment, and one thing I just want to note is how that was really an anomaly historically, because for most of the history, there wasn't a shared environment, before broadcasting, and especially, broadcast networks, first radio, then television. But before that, people had a local environment and so some direct access to a shared reality, which now it's all broken up in a different kind of way that leaves us further distanced, with maps that we can't see if they correspond to the territory or not. I'm sorry.
And I think the shared geography and the previous ways in which people, again, shared in a reality was also a kind of just existential indifference to what was remote. I mean, you really didn't have any control about it. You had no awareness about it. And you just kind of lived your life. If the neighbor's pigs got out, or if there was a big fire, or if there was, a drought, you were all going through that and people dealt with it. But now when you're continuously getting news, about things that are beyond what you could do anything about anyway, it's so exhausting.
I want to follow up on the idea of remoteness, though, because I think that part of this slow burn, this development that Thom was referring to, I think part of that related to a feeling like this is very large, but it's also distant from my life. And I think little by little, it's becoming closer and closer to people's lived experience. And perhaps what's going on in Minneapolis is the best example of how it's becoming closer and closer. And the last couple of weeks in Minneapolis and seeing citizens gunned down in the street, I think people are feeling that this is closer to them, that it could happen to any of us, and that it is closer to a lived experience than perhaps we felt before. And sure. I think when we look to see whether there's an inflection point, that question of how close it is, how personal it is to us now, may be a turning point.
I met with two students yesterday, two journalism students that I have an independent study with. And part of one of the projects that they're going to do for me this semester is to write a story that goes out beyond our student newspaper and out into the world, and to start to really think about practicing as journalists beyond the confines of our campus and our stories. And the two of them live near to each other, just north and across the river from where I live. I live, for listeners' sense, 8 miles north of the George Washington Bridge, right above New York City. And so they live just a little further up and across the river. And they were talking before they came in to meet with me about the fact that there is going to be a county meeting about opening an ICE detention center near where they both live, and talk about bringing it home and bringing it home, locally to New York, where we haven't felt the brunt of it yet. The administration is doing all kinds of things to put the screws on downstate New York and the New York metropolitan area, which is sort of seen as a liberal bastion, discontinuing funding for a rail tunnel under the Hudson River. But this is the first time that the Immigration Customs Enforcement seems to be coming to us. But I wanted to bring up something else as we were talking about the semantic environment of our media and our news and information media and how it's changed. And I noticed this just over the past couple of weeks. Again, dating and aging myself, I still, have a Facebook. I'm still on Facebook, where, the younger folks among our listeners are probably like, great grandpa. That's, 20 years ago. But what I have been seeing increasingly, I've noticed that I think both on my laptop and on my phone, there are two separate settings for your feed now. And one is the feed that just comes automatically. And another one is you can set it to just look at your feed from your friends. And what I'm seeing in the feed that shows up is all of this blatant propaganda using AI-based images and deep fake videos, and my feed is being hammered with this stuff out of the blue. And it's really surprising. And so, when we talk about a news and information media, this isn't a news and information media. This is, branding the administration and its policies and its activities. This is about the fact that it's all for media consumption and for an audience. And what is shocking and surprising to me, and this speaks to a change in the semantic environment of what's going on in the realm of social media on the cusp of AI taking it over, is how bizarre these messages and the incessant bombardment of them comes across. It's so fake and unbelievable, and yet they wouldn't be doing it if it didn't have an audience.
Yeah. Again, I want to follow that. I really appreciate all that, Thom. I mean, I think that's so, and this again goes back to this overpouring. And I don't disagree with what you were saying, Sue, about the sense in which maybe there's a kind of encroachment salience, or the degree to which it feels nearer and nearer now with all the Minneapolis stuff that's going on. Another part of me would say, no. I get it. But another part of me that's just all confusion, because this is just one example of where we're all momentarily paying attention to the same thing, at least it seems like. But if instead I go, no, there's still this just massive ambient uncertainty about everything. And it has to do with AI. It has to do with higher ed, with Venezuela, Greenland, Iran, the totalitarianism and authoritarianism on the global stage. It has to do with Gaza and Ukraine, with the Epstein files. There's just 80 million things from 80 moment that we could right now go, oh, let's stop paying attention to Minneapolis. Now there's all this other stuff. I mean, I just feel like there's all this stuff at all these times. There's no way to sort of just stop and get like a moment of breather and go, okay, let's just have a second to think about what's happened in the last couple of years. And instead, you're hearing stuff about, there's some new virus and there's outbreak of measles. I mean, they got, who knows what Kennedy Jr. is doing now with, milk and other stuff. It's all just, you get a pain in the neck trying to follow it. The whole thing is what I'm saying, not just some particular issue that right now is catching the news of the day and people look like they're all paying attention to the same thing. I mean, it's a cover over of all the other things that have just, like, it was like a child that right now is looking at one little shiny item while there's all this other messy stuff all around them.
I think the overriding, there are certain overriding themes, and one of the overriding issues in all of what you're describing, Corey, is trust. And there's been a fundamental shift in what people can trust. We used to trust our institutions. We used to trust our government. We used to trust our leaders. We used to trust that the guardrails would hold. Even in Trump's first term, the guardrails will hold. The saner voices, the adults in the room, they'll hold. And certainly, we used to trust, at least to a degree, what came from the podium at the White House. And there's been a fundamental shift in what we can trust. And I think that that crumbling of that kind of foundation that, whether we realized it or not, we relied on, is at the heart of so much. And when we talk about not only the institutions and the semantic environment in which we find ourselves, but the media environment in which we find ourselves, as Thom mentioned, the deep fakes, the AI generated, almost immediately AI generated images about whatever the shiny object du jour is. So right now we're talking about the shooting in Minneapolis. And almost immediately there were AI generated, manipulated images, AI enhanced images that purported to show a gun. If you look carefully, you'd see the telltale signs that there were distorted limbs or missing heads, the things that didn't make sense. But how careful and critical were people viewing these? And so we used to have some foundation for trust. And now we're being told explicitly, a la George Orwell in 1984, reject the evidence of your eyes and your ears. And we're being told that by the very people that represent the institutions that we could trust. And so, I think that's kind of the fundamental underpinning, that we don't trust our people, we don't trust our leaders, we don't trust our institutions, we can't trust necessarily, and we're being told, don't trust what's before your eyes and ears. And now we don't necessarily trust even the media images that we have so readily available to us.
So that it's so interesting. It makes me think of how Ronald Reagan liked the Russian proverb of trust but verify. I remember Gorbachev saying, "You say that every time." But I think maybe some of this is while awful, is also an important lesson to learn. And one is that, sociology teaches us that society is made up of institutions, or at least, one approach to sociology, because Niklas Luhmann says, no, it's made up of acts of communication. But to the extent that it is institutions, it's an important reminder to say that institutions are not real. People are real. That is, people are concrete reality. And we need to just understand that, because once you lose sight of that and think that institutions will control people, that's not gonna, that eventually is gonna give way. So I think that's an important lesson. Maybe the lesson, we all recall Neil Postman and his critique of television and image-based culture. Maybe we ought to learn not to trust what we see, and to find other ways again to verify, and not rely on these images. And I can't help but think, in amusing ourselves to death, which so many people are pointed to in this past decade, that Postman talked about information overload, which is sort of, Corey put that so well, with all the stuff flying at us, and that we get incoherence, because it's just one damn thing after another. It's incoherent. It's three I's, where incoherence, irrelevance, because most of it doesn't affect us directly most of the time, leading to impotence, because we still are affected by it, emotionally, but there's nothing we can do. There's no way to stop it as individuals, so we're left feeling impotent. But I also can't help but think of how Marshall McLuhan, long ago, in talking about electronic media generally, as you may recall, he said that electronic media extend the nervous system out beyond the body. And what he also said, and this is from one of the sort of like televised interviews, was that when you extend your nervous system outside of your body, you leave it open to others to sort of stimulate and activate. And of course, he was talking more about advertisers, but, in the same, again, pointing to what Corey and Thom, what you guys are talking about is, we have our nervous systems out there through, more extensively than ever because of online social media and the like. And we are getting, bombarded, and it is visceral. It is debilitating in a lot of ways, which is maybe what they're after.
I have a question, right? If part of the lesson from Neil in amusing ourselves is in a world of video, in a news and information environment of pictures and moving pictures, if you can't trust the images, if an image can't tell the truth, can't make a propositional statement, what happens when now we have, I literally saw a doctored photograph of Donald Trump standing with Martin Luther King last week after Martin Luther King's birthday and holiday.
My God.
Yeah, but that's so hyper unreal. Is it going to then turn us back to say, yeah, we can't believe anything that we see anymore? Or are we at a point where people are going to be faked out by that? Like I think about the history of science fiction and, watching, the Earth stood still from the 1950s and watching
The day the Earth
space.
stood still.
Yeah, the day the Earth stood still. And, and seeing like cardboard sets and things like that. And then, Star Wars. And when they use the Death Star, they're using a switcher from a television. And all of these things that are fake. Are they going to become so inseparable from what would be a captured real image that people will be more faked out? Or is it going to flip back?
I think people believe whatever they want to believe. Look at how many, Harari's recent book, Nexus, which I thought was so great. He, talks about, the most replicated image in the world, throughout the world, is of Jesus Christ. And yet this looks nothing like the person. People are happy enough with the position, the face that they want it to look like. I think part of it is this, that when communities are really grounded in shared geography and the kinds of experiences that come from shared place and shared time, then the information that gets generated between and among the people, it's not really requiring trust in the same way as the exigencies around them. That is, the physical environment is clear enough for them to generate messages of shared purpose. Whereas when community is completely removed from shared space and time, when it's outside of geography, then one of the main functions of the messages, like the main functions of the expressions and the communications, are to create the sense of community. So there's a kind of endemic polarizing and way in which identity politics is part of this kind of dispersion through space and time that the electric media are making possible.
But I think it's fascinating. There's an awful lot to unpack there. The relationship between community and trust, community and authenticity, and geographic community and authenticity. Mm-hmm. But I want to take it in a little bit of a different direction, because I do think that in the information environment that we have, whatever version of, let's say, the video of the most recent shooting is consumed, it's out there in a very different way than prior videos were out there. I think back to a video that was supposed to shape the way that people saw policing and videotaped, 1991, and Rodney King. And the Rodney King video was shared through what we would now call the legacy media. It was shared through the network news. It was shared in still images in the front page of, everything from the New York Times and the Washington Post on. So to local newspapers. And I think that video was supposed to change our conceptualization of and our critical view of policing and police brutality. And now we're getting these videos through social media. And, and that question of, again, back to trust, which source do you trust? Do you trust your phone? Do you trust the television station or the cable station that might be showing some version or multiple versions? It's. I think there's a different way in which we're processing video these days, and the technology of the telephone, the ubiquity of the telephone, I think also raises some important questions. When you think about it, the weapon that local people are using, the weapon that that the people in Minneapolis are using, is a cell phone with their video camera and a whistle. These are comparatively low tech or readily available technologies to fight back. Do you trust the whistle? Maybe you trust the whistle of your neighbor, and do you trust the video of your neighbor? I think it raises some really interesting new wrinkles in the way that we understand these technologies and what we trust.
It's so interesting that you bring this up. I was watching MSNBC this morning, and Chris Hayes was on as a guest, and he mentioned how sort of things become metaphorical that originally were real things. And he specifically mentioned whistleblowing, which is the metaphor for unveiling wrongdoing. But, that we've gone back to that, which of course is what police used to do with blowing the whistle. But also you bring up, the cell phone and it really has revolutionized things. And there's this idea of countering surveillance with sousveillance. Not Sue as in Susan Drucker, but SOUS, underveillance rather than overveillance. And I know Ron Deibert up at the University of Toronto had written about this some time ago. There was like a national surveillance day where people, this is before the phones, so they were to bring their cameras, their video cameras, and record the cameras that are put out there by the government for surveillance purposes, to turn the cameras on the cameras, which turns out to, at least in some places, is actually illegal. There are laws against it. But I do want to just also go back to Rodney King, right? Because it's so interesting. And that's where it's not just trust, but it is language and framing. And in the trial, now I have to say I am reporting this secondhand because I wasn't paying attention. I was tuned out at that point. But my former colleague Ed Wachtell, who we all know, is the one who has said this. I've heard him talk about this, that at the first trial against the police who were beating Rodney King, the prosecution made the mistake of showing the video and letting it stand without any kind of framing, that is, without language to explain it. And that what the defense did was they showed it frame by frame, because the point in question was not whether the police were allowed to beat him as he was resisting arrest, but when it became excessive force. That was the question. And so they showed it frame by frame, asking, was it excessive force now? Was it excessive force now? Right, and bit by bit, and showed, and in that way was able to frame it as you're unable to really determine at what specific point did it become excessive force. Sort of like Zeno's paradox with Achilles racing against the tortoise, But I always use this example when I'm teaching general semantics and teaching about the difference between images and language, because we need language to provide that frame. And then you can trust in the framing, in the explanation, but absent the language, I don't see where it even is a matter of trust, because you don't know what you're looking at. You don't know how to contextualize it. The images lack context. They don't make a statement. They don't make a claim. They don't make an argument. They can be used as evidence, but they just are there for whatever you want to take them to be.
So very much the framing, the language that's being used to frame the narrative of what is going on. The language of portraying the ICE observers as a dangerous threat. The use of language about brandishing a weapon. The claiming that there was chaos going on. Well, if there was chaos, who generated it? The allegations that there was that he resisted the victim, resisted disarmament. All of that language, calling him and Nicole Good a domestic terrorist, using language like would-be assassin, or calling the victim a suspect rather than a victim. I mean, the use of language of those terms, which I think are being used as high-level abstractions, I think are an important tool that the administration is trying to use.
Yeah, I want to echo that too. And I think that's really right there. So, I mean, I don't disagree with anything that Lance was saying, but just to follow up on where I think Sue was potentially, going there. I mean, if you take someone like Becker, Becker says, communication is largely a farce because it's more than people want to realize. It's a kind of power rooting and appetite sharing, and it's largely about identity alignments rather than like rational deliberation of facts and whatnot.
Are you referring to Ernest Becker, Corey?
Yeah, Ernest Becker, yeah. And so you do get, he lays all this out in, he did a piece toward the end of his life called An Anti-Idealist Stance on Communication. And he was somewhat critical of like the rationalistic models of communication. And he kind of, it's the prevalence of things like dog whistles and virtue signaling and the way that like partisan speech just unfolds immediately around some event. I mean, it is potentially, like what happens is, I think one way to account for it is as people lose all ability to trust and they don't know what the facts of the matter are, then they rely upon those people who they feel themselves in alignment with and how they frame it through the language choices they're making. And so it really, because it becomes quite difficult in an information overload environment to disambiguate like the identity politics from the trust issue. You see what I mean? Those seem to be very tied in together.
Lance, I really appreciate the example of the Rodney King trial and the idea of talking about going through a video frame by frame while talking about what we refer to as framing, which is contextualizing things in language.
Yeah, I guess no pun intended here.
No, it's great. It's great. As for people who have made their living by virtue of the fact that we teach young people in higher education, what I'm concerned about with framing moving forward is both of those ideas of frames, that you've got people with their phones and they're spending 6.5 and 7 hours a day on their phones, mostly just, doom scrolling, if I can use the word. And how are they making sense of these things going on without the framing that we're talking about? Who is contextualizing things for them to make them understand what's going on when they're watching little bits of videos and think that that's the news and information environment of their world? And, again, because we are coming at this. We're not digital natives. We have lived through this whole evolution of media, and they're just grappling with what they were born into. And, they got a phone when they were, 11 or 12 years old from their parents who wanted them to have this, tetherless tether so that they could, keep tabs on them. And they're all doing these cool things that all their friends are doing. And that's their environment for being citizens.
Do you think, Tom, that that two-step mediation has changed? I think back to, there was an intermedia book that Gary Gumpert he and somebody else had co-edited many years ago. Yeah, there you go. And Thayer has a piece in there on what he called the two-step model, and he said it wasn't a medium to a person, it was a medium to a person, and then the way that those collective, your friends and your family talk about that media content or whatever that medium. And I wonder about that. Like, I think in some way that's probably changed, that people just consume it directly, individually, in a fragmented way. But in another sense, social media has this kind of sharing of content where if somebody gets something, they find something interesting, then they share it on Instagram or on Facebook, and then they think about it differently depending upon how people react. So it seems like that model is still somewhat there. It would need to be updated and adjusted, but I think that process still seems, or not. I mean, I'm more asking.
Well, and I'm not there to the extent that they are by any means, but what about the idea of influencers? Now, when we think and talk about influencers, we're thinking about, beautiful young women on yachts and bikinis and things like, and having fabulous dinners at wonderful restaurants. But the podcasters, right, and the broadcasters, and there's another term for it that is escaping me at the moment, are influencers. And it's weird because they're part of the media ecosystem, but they are part of the two-step flow of explaining and framing, which is changed, which is different.
Yeah.
So my understanding of the two-step flow was that at one point, the concept was, well, that was then and this is now, and it's a multi-step flow. But with social media,
that's an intermedia, the multi-step flow.
Multi-step flow, and but now I think we've reverted back to a two-step flow. If you look at influencers, or even just who you follow on social media, that individual who chooses to share something can influence your perception. And I think the two-step flow model has enjoyed a bit of a resurgence recently.
Well, but influencers are an interesting phenomenon because on one hand, there's sort of like the fulfillment of Andy Warhol's prediction that in the future everyone will be famous for 15 minutes, or that is the concept of celebrity becomes much broader and much even shallower than it was. But on the other hand, they take the place, and Tom brought this up, of opinion leaders who in the past were someone that you knew personally, your uncle or an older person in the community, or just someone like who's knowledgeable about cars, for example. And a lot of that goes again to the breakdown of extended family, organic community, and so forth, so that people have less people to turn to. But I did want to go back to that idea of identity that Corey was bringing up, because I think one thing that's come out with most recently with Alex Pretty's killing was how, this is something that was brought up, was that because he was a white male and someone who had a legally carrying and a concealed firearm on him, that was kind of a turning point in a way that that so many more people, but particularly people who are not on the liberal side of the spectrum, could identify with him, where even Renee Good, as a white woman, that's so much again on the, particularly the right-wing side of things, there's so much antipathy against women and against kind of, the kind of liberal women that would be concerned about, would be protesting ICE and so forth. That
She's
there
a poet.
Yes, I know.
Gay.
Yes, gay as well. I did read her poem, which was interesting. It was a kind of student work, but. in any event. But still, you're right that even just being identified as a poet puts her in this like kind of minority that, I think a lot of people aside from the kind of highly educated old school conservatives who actually admired literature and drew on that and for preserving and conserving, our cultural heritage, which was, certainly admirable about them. But aside from that, particularly this populist kind of right wingers, that also puts her out of the mainstream. And so, and this is even even generalizable further that in both cases you're talking about white middle class individuals as opposed to all of the immigrants and people who are here legally, including citizens who may be of people of color generally, who are being assaulted and some cases also killed and arrested and abducted. All of this going on without the same level of horror or protest going on because so many people don't identify with them.
I think part of what makes the latest shooting so interesting and galvanizing has been exactly what you're dealing with, Lance, because it's really shifted or certainly shifted the perception of some of these protesters or ICE watchers. And it's not only, as we were talking about before, that it's a white middle-class male, a citizen, a gun owner. It's also a patriot. It's also somebody that respected military service. Mm-hmm. It's someone who, there's now video out there of a flag-draped casket, and he's reading, a statement of honor when they lost a patient in a VA hospital that he was working in. So it kind of turns things on its head when the old static stereotypes of what a protester would look like takes on the attributes of the people who would not normally identify with a protester.
Here's what I worry about. Here's what I fear. And this goes back to, in a way, part of where we started today. A white, gun-carrying, middle-class citizen. It's not going to change anything. It's not going to matter. It's news this week, and they'll, come up with ways to, cover it up and seize the news, or the propaganda machine, the persuasive machine with something else or other things, and it'll just continue. And I experiencing it as it happened, Renee, and then Alex, I'm like, this has got to be the game changer. I've said that before.
I think that to me, it's a call to, as I said before, this uncertainty, this kind of ambient uncertainty that's everywhere, and it's looming from geopolitical levels, climate change, AI, the future of higher ed. If you heard this, Harvard's cutting its PhD programs by close to half. If you saw some of these announcements, all these things are happening. The only thing to do, it would seem, is to just be kind to everyone in your world. Love your family. Take care of your friends. Try to make every conversation you're in somewhat conscious, to have the register of we're all in a time of just unprecedented uncertainty, and to, throw out real compassion. I think most people are really in a state of kind of existential panic and despair, and they're bordering on a kind of throwing in the towel with regard to humanity and it's the basic decencies of things, just to try to really be decent as much as you can. I think it's always good advice, but probably never more so than today. I don't know.
Yeah. I did want to throw out one other thing about these incidents that I'd read about and I thought was very interesting, which was with Renee Good, that, those last words that are on camera, there she says, "I'm not mad at you, dude." And someone wrote about this, that dude is a word that women use, that she recognized immediately the use of that word dude, which is something that women use to address men who are being aggressive and even threatening, as a way to try to disarm them. It is a way to try to create a kind of identity, in a sense, we're bros kind of thing. But that it was very familiar to, I forget the name of the author who was writing about this, that particular kind of usage. And it was certainly news to me, and I'm not one of these misogynist, MAGA types, but I had no idea, just as we have we're so ignorant, even those of us who are, try to be supportive and of what women actually experience in the world. That just really struck me in terms of, again, the use of language.
And he shot her and called her a bitch.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting, but it either underscores that, because I was unaware of it, it either underscores my lack of awareness or how lucky I've been that I haven't needed to know what the language of dealing with an overly aggressive men are. But it's really interesting to know that word would be so powerful.
Yeah.
I wondered about it. It stood out to me, but I didn't have the context to understand it.
Yeah, well, I think it's, something that is part of millennial experience, more so than baby boomer and Gen Xers.
I think it's a regional thing too. Like when I was in Indiana, people didn't use the word dude because men there in Indiana used it as a reference to their private parts. They would call it their dude. And so calling somebody a dude was not a thing you did. People would get very angry. They'd be like, "Did you just call me a dude?" And so it was,
Well, I don't know, but I mean, it did seem to be, I think this was part of 80s movies, where you hear people using that language.
Where's my car, dude?
Well, I think this is also an opportunity, and speaking as someone who is on the liberal side of things, to really rethink, at what point, were the grievances on the other side really leading to this. I have always been, someone who's born and raised in New York City. I was always had a kind of abhorrence about firearms, but, we also knew that it made a difference when African Americans armed themselves, and that there was something to be said that the first gun control legislation came because of the Black Panthers arming themselves, and so while there's something unique and probably problematic about American gun culture, at this point there, you can kind of see where there is a point. I mean, I still wouldn't want to live in that kind of area that Corey's talking about, but on the other hand, at this point, there does seem to be something some good rationale for the Second Amendment that we're seeing.
I mean, I think that's one of the questions at the heart of democracy. I mean, Val has gone back to this a million times, over the years, but it's, can you justify sort of tolerating the intolerant? And that's part of the problem of democracy, is that we kind of want to be able to say, I'm going to tolerate even intolerance, but at a certain point, you have to go, enough is enough, and then we don't know how to make that move, how to transition from trying to be tolerant to difference.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, Corey, Lance, the three of us were together when the National Communication Association conference was in Dallas a few years back. And we went out to lunch the first day we were all in town. And there's a guy who goes up to the takeout counter wearing a semi-automatic rifle over his back. And I'm like, yeah, because you really have to protect yourself when you're taking out your lunch, it's like, and it was just so alien, to me. And by the way, to talk about, I am, I guess, left of center if I have to identify myself. I am in New York State. I'm registered as an independent, which basically means that I can't vote in the primaries of the Democratic or Republican Party. That's the pitfall of that. I am not a libertarian independent. I just, following the great general semanticist Groucho Marx, I just wouldn't want to belong to a club that would have me as a member. George Will wrote a column in yesterday's Washington Post about the loutocracy, right? A bunch of louts. And, George Will, as a representative of social conservatism, not necessarily economic conservatism, that too. This is a person who I could have a conversation with and listen to and appreciate his thoughtfulness and his informedness. And, we can agree to disagree and probably, I'd love to have a conversation with the guy. I don't believe that is what the conservative movement has come to, either in terms of economic conservatism or social conservatism. And I would invite anybody who would want to talk to us about what we're talking about here today, whether they feel the same about social liberalism and economic liberalism.
Mm-hmm. It would be good to hear from folks, but I think, Thom, the problem with being an independent is that, at least depending on where you are, the primaries may be the only election that matters. That's why David Brin, the science fiction writer and social commentator, says that, folks like Democrats living in red states should register as Republicans because the primaries are the only things that matters. I do think this brings us to, the point that one of our biggest problems are the persistence of political parties, which have proven to be meaningless and yet have a stranglehold on our elections. And, and that forces us into this two-valued orientation of either it's a Democrat or it's a Republican, apart from occasional places where you get independents being elected once in a while, but that and it sort of forces you. Well, I may not like this person's policies at all, but at least he's not a member of the other team, and we would be. That's where at least one of the ideas of the what's the name of it where it's
rank order voting.
Right. Thank you, Corey. Rank order voting is one way around that, because it's still hard. It's like, how do you get rid of it? It's not in the Constitution. Constitution does not mention political parties. George Washington warned against political parties.
I'm the faculty mentor
of our existence.
I'm the faculty mentor for the rank order voting here at Grand Valley, mm-hmm. and it's been very important for us. And for the it's a student group, so I'm very little involved in it. But on the stuff that I am involved in, the students really are very clear that this is a nonpartisan group. This is not a group that's aligned with either the left or the right. The rank order voting, it's for the people.
This all sounds familiar
for a lot of these reasons that you've mentioned,
I was just joking. This all sounds familiar to a chapter I read recently.
Speaking of which, and for folks who are unaware, I would like to note that the Institute of General Semantics has recently published, we continue to publish new books and new editions of classics all the time. One of our most recent publications is a collection edited by Corey Anton and Thom Gencarelli entitled General Semantics and Politics.
Yay.
That's on that publication, guys, dudes.
And if you're in New York City next Wednesday night, we'll be talking about it at the Players Club.
Weather permitting, because, it seems like we're not out of the snow apocalypse zone quite yet, but we remain optimistic in that regard. And maybe that's at least a positive note to end on, as the whole point is to engage in dialogue and continue to engage in dialogue. So really, Susan Drucker, Thom Gencarelli, Corey Anton, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Conversation.
Pleasure.
Don't think we solved any problems, but at least we vented.
Yeah, I think we identified some important things to keep an eye on, though. Some sort of trends and meta trends of what's going on. If we're going to do WIGO, I think we tried to hit at some of the problems of trying to tell what it is that's going on.
Yeah, this is a great point, and again, I'm creating accurate maps that are as accurate as we're able to is the first step towards navigating troubled waters and building that bridge. So, thank you again.
You've been listening to the January 2026 episode of Semantic Reactions, featuring Corey Anton, Susan Drucker, Thom Gencarelli, and Lance Strate. If you like what you've heard, or even if you haven't, please consider becoming a member of the Institute of General Semantics if you're not one already. In addition to supporting our efforts, IGS members receive an annual subscription to our journal, etc., a review of general semantics, access to our online and in-person events, lectures, and seminars, and discounts on the books and audiovisual materials that we sell. Regular membership is only $50 and half off for students. Your membership and any additional donations you care to make will help to support our offerings and activities as we work to bring a measure of sanity to the world. The Institute of General Semantics is a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to research and education on a wide range of topics. They include language and symbols, meaning and perception, communication and representation, media and technology, science and epistemology, creativity, and critical thinking. We are dedicated to making the world a better place through practical strategies for improving our semantic environment, individually and collectively. For more information about the Institute and our activities, and to become a member and supporter of our work, please visit our website at generalsemantics.org. That's generalsemantics, one word, .org. And this brings to a close our 41st episode of Semantic Reactions, the official podcast of the Institute of General Semantics. This is Ben Houck, signing off, saying, we hope you'll join us next time. And until then, just remember this simple fact, that the map is not the territory.